Hello friends, welcome to another tutorial. Today we're creating this particle effect tunnel with beautiful color patterns and neon streaks. I hope you'll like it. Give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and make sure to subscribe if you do. Alright, we start again with an empty scene. Add a circular cylinder, rotate it by 90 degrees and stretch it to a length of 16 meters. Now you'll see me subdivide it into 4 parts. And never forget to always scale your objects. Again, you can see me doing this on the screen. Then we do a mesh split so everything is separated and add a smooth modifier. This subdivides the individual segments that we just split. I also add a simple deformer, as you can see. Now, set it to Z, rotate it to 360 degrees, and bring a bit of action into the scene. Here you can see I move it upward and then set the origin to the center. It should basically always be right in the middle. This is what the whole thing looks like from the inside. Now we add the camera animation. I animate it from 0 to 300 frames. It stops at 16 meters. This gives us the standard tunnel animation. Then we add a shell around everything. I'll mirror it later as well as Blender allows. Hopefully the final result won't disappoint you. We'll also make this 16 meters long, an extra 16 meters, so the loop will be perfect later. Now we move on to shading. For the shading, you can either just follow along or experiment on your own, whatever you feel like. The most important thing here is the texture animations. First we add an emission shader, then a color ramp to get some nice colors, and of course using Node Wrangler, which I hope you have enabled. Here I replace the texture with a wave texture. This is where the magic happens later. Then I add another texture. Here I set all the values, a bit of color, a bit of light. These are all things you're already familiar with if you know the basics. Now a bit of playing around and some tinkering. I'll change the Musgrave texture later. For now, it's just a rough placeholder. Next, I animate the texture directly on the wave texture. At frame 0, I set it to 0, and at 300 frames, I set the value to 12.256. This almost always results in a perfect looping texture animation. Now I change the Musgrave texture to noise. You can play around with that. And as you can see, I don't have a fixed plan. I just experiment until I like it myself. I recommend the same to you because this isn't about a school assignment. It's about creating something you personally enjoy. Because if you like it yourself, chances are the audience will like it too. That's my personal rule of thumb. Now I add a few more colors and play around with the values a bit. As I said, I'm fast forwarding a little here so it goes quicker. That way you can still see everything I'm doing. You can copy it exactly or keep experimenting on your own. Alright, that's enough for now. Now I combine the two objects into one collection. Please do it exactly like this because it saves a huge amount of resources and makes rendering much easier later. Now comes the shell texture. Here I add the reflection as best as possible. As you know, Blender doesn't have 100% perfect reflections. I'm using the standard reflection via the specular value. Of course, you can also experiment with glass, textures, or other settings. Now I'll take a look at how the reflection looks. Okay, it can be better and it will get better later. But for now, it's fine. A bit more contrast, reduce the hazy look of the emission a bit. That already looks better. Now I'll keep playing around in fast forward so you don't have to wait too long. Again, I'll be tweaking the colors and the values a bit. I'm trying to create these individual lines that give the neon effect. As you can see, it's all about playing, trying things out again and again. Lots of color, lots of light, lots of effects. The nice thing about loops is that you don't have strict measurements like you do in architectural modeling, where everything has to be perfectly straight. Sometimes uneven or unusual shapes actually look better. My tip: before saving anything, play around with it a bit more and think about what else you could change. We definitely already have something nice here. Now I'll work a bit more on the reflection to make it strong. Unfortunately, that's a bit of a weak point in Blender. Reflections aren't that easy to implement, but you make the best of it, and it doesn't look bad at all. It has its own style. Here I simply create a ring that the particles will later emit from. I move it slightly forward and parent it to the camera so it always stays at a fixed distance in front of the camera. Now, come the particle elements. They don't have to be complicated shapes. I just use lines or spikes, whatever you want to call them. I smooth them so they don't have hard edges. Subdivision level 2, apply it and scale them down a bit so they're nice and thin. Now we duplicate the whole thing. I make 4 versions, assign colors first, and then change size and color so you can clearly tell them apart later. Now we move on to the particle effect and first create a standard particle system. Set the particle count. Important for a loop, always start at half of your total frames. So minus 150 to plus 150. I set the lifetime to 600, which is double the number of frames. I also changed the gravity. I set it fairly high so it flies toward me. Now I increase the particle count to 1000. Everything is set. Now we duplicate the particle system. Important, separate it. Then set the range from plus 150 to plus 450 frames. And that's basically it. Now bake it once. Now I'll just tweak a few small details. I slightly animate the spirals, rotating counterclockwise just to add more motion. I also make the camera a bit wider so it feels like a large tunnel. 50 millimeters works quite well here. I also move the particles a bit farther away, but remember, after that you have to bake everything again, otherwise nothing will happen. Now we're almost done, so it's very important to save. It's best to save right at the beginning. I constantly forget that myself. Maybe I'm already too old for it. Now we choose the output location for the video. If your PC isn't very powerful, it's better to render as PNG. I usually render in MPEG. The advantage of PNG is that if your PC crashes, you can continue from the last frame. That's a tip from me if your computer doesn't have much power. I hope you learned a lot in this video. Leave a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and see you in the next tutorial.